The words she spoke would shatter 12 years of friendship and build something neither of them could ever unmake. James Carter had faced billion-dollar negotiations that bent entire markets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the sentence that came from Evelyn Beaumont's lips that autumn afternoon in Brooklyn. I want you to be my first. For a moment, the world outside the cafe window seemed to still, the honk of taxis, the murmur of voices, the hiss of the espresso machine, all fading into something distant and unreal. James blinked once, twice, as if maybe he'd misheard her. But Evelyn's dark eyes didn't waver. She sat across from him at their usual corner table in Haven and Brew, the small cafe tucked between brownstone buildings where they had spent countless lazy Sundays since college. Her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup, as though drawing courage from its warmth. The late October light caught the subtle copper undertones in her skin, making her look at once fragile and fiercely determined. Eve, he said finally, his voice rough. Say that again. I want it to be you. Her tone trembled, but her gaze didn't. I've thought about this for months, James. You're the only person I trust. He stared at her, the words colliding in his mind with everything he knew about her. The woman who had built a career from nothing, who argued fearlessly in boardrooms, who'd held his hand through his father's funeral, who made him laugh when the world was falling apart. His best friend, Evelyn, he said carefully, setting his cup down. You can't just ask this, she finished softly. I know, it sounds insane, but I need to say it out loud before I lose the nerve. He leaned back, eyes searching her face for a hint of a joke, a flicker of irony. There was none. Her voice grew quieter. I'm 28, James. I've had chances, I've had relationships, but it never felt right. It wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about trust, about safety, about knowing I could be vulnerable without being judged. And the truth is, she drew in a shaky breath, you're the only person I've ever felt that with. James swallowed hard. The air between them thickened, filled with everything unspoken. Outside, a gust of wind sent yellow leaves tumbling past the window like fragments of a fading season. Eve, he began. You don't mean I do. Her hand trembled as she reached across the table, touching his. You've been there for every part of my life. My first heartbreak, my first job offer, my mother's funeral. Every milestone you've been beside me. I don't want this part. This first to be with a stranger I'll regret. I want it to be with someone who already knows me, with someone who cares. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his blonde hair. You're asking me to risk everything we've built. Our friendship, our hell, our sanity. I'm asking you to be gentle, she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The cafe around them faded into soft blurs of sound dishes, clinking, the low hum of conversation. James's pulse beat in his throat, heavy and uneven. Evelyn, he said finally, his voice low. You know what happens if we cross that line. We can't go back. I know. He studied her face, the curve of her jaw, the tremor of her lashes, the vulnerability that rarely broke through her usual armor. She wasn't playing games. This wasn't seduction. It was truth, raw and terrifying. Why me? He asked quietly. Her lips curved in the faintest, saddest smile. Because I've trusted you with every part of my life except this one. He looked away, trying to steady his breath. You think I could just do that for you, and then what? Pretend it never happened. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to be honest, if you can't tell me now. God, Eve. He laughed once, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief, fear, confusion. You have no idea what you're asking. I do, she said simply. That's why I'm asking you, and not someone else. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died when he met her eyes again. There it was, trust complete and unguarded. It was the same look she'd given him the night his father's company collapsed when he thought his life was over. She'd placed her hand over his and said, "We'll rebuild, together." That night, she'd been right, and somehow he knew, if he said yes now, nothing about his world would ever be the same again. He pulled his hand back, his jaw tightening. "I need to think," I expected that she said softly. When they stood to leave, the familiar warmth between them had shifted into something fragile and charged. He walked her to her car, as he always did, but when she hugged him goodnight, it lingered. The city lights caught in her hair, and the faint scent of jasmine clung to him long after she drove away. By the time James reached his penthouse overlooking the East River, he was shaking not from anger, but from the terrifying realization that somewhere deep down, he didn't want to say no. He poured himself a drink, staring out over the glittering skyline. He'd built his empire on control, knowing what to risk and what to protect. But Evelyn, she was the one part of his life he could never quantify, never categorize. He thought of her smile that first day at Stanford, the way she'd challenged him during debate practice, fearless and brilliant. The late-night study sessions that turned into laughter and shared secrets. The quiet way she'd slipped her hand into his at his mother's funeral, when everyone else had kept a polite distance. And now she'd asked him for something no boardroom deal could ever prepare him for: her trust, her vulnerability, her first memory of intimacy. He set down the glass, heart pounding. He could almost hear her voice again. "It's not about love, James. It's about trust." But he knew better. Trust like that was love, whether she admitted it or not. His phone buzzed. A message from her. "I'm sorry if I made things weird. I just needed to be honest with you. Thank you for listening." He stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "You didn't make things weird. You made them real." He hit send before he could stop himself. That night, neither of them slept. Evelyn lay in her small apartment in Bed-Stuy, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd destroyed the most stable relationship in her life. James lay awake in his penthouse, replaying her voice in his mind, the tremor of courage beneath her fear. By dawn, the decision was already forming in his chest, quiet and unstoppable. He couldn't let her give herself to someone else, because somewhere between all the years of laughter and loyalty, she'd already given him everything that mattered. He didn't know what he'd say yet, or how he'd fix the chaos she'd set in motion. But one thing was clear: nothing between them would ever be the same again. Somewhere in Brooklyn, as the first sunlight touched her window, Evelyn whispered into the silence, "Please don't let me regret this." And miles away, watching the sunrise from his glass balcony, James Carter muttered to no one, "You just changed everything, Eve." Because love doesn't always begin with a kiss. Sometimes it starts with a question so daring it breaks the line between friendship and forever. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that one truth could alter your world, you'll understand Evelyn's courage and James's fear. And maybe, just maybe, you'll ask yourself, what would I risk for the one person who's always been there? If this story touched something in you, don't forget to share it. Leave your thoughts below and stay with us for where love begins to test its own limits. The city woke slowly under a pale gray sky, and James Carter hadn't slept a single hour. The early hum of Manhattan usually comforted him, trucks rumbling horns, blaring coffee carts hissing on the street below. But today, it all felt different, like the sound of a world he no longer recognized. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his Soho penthouse shirt, unbuttoned, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. The skyline stretched before him like a promise and a warning. For 12 years, he and Evelyn Beaumont had lived in a perfect balance, a friendship so deep it defied definition, so safe it felt eternal. And now, with 10 words, she had tilted the axis of that world forever. I want you to be my first. He could still hear her voice, steady but soft, still see the quiet courage in her eyes as she said it. She wasn't impulsive. Evelyn never was. Every word she spoke came from a place of reflection. And that terrified him more than if she'd blurted it out recklessly. His phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Her name flashed on the screen. His heart jumped before he could stop it. "Hey," he answered, trying to sound casual. "Hi." Her voice carried that same calm strength he both admired and dreaded. "Did I wake you?" "I wasn't asleep," he admitted. "Neither was I." A beat of silence. It wasn't the comfortable kind that had always existed between them. This one was charged, trembling full of all the things they weren't saying. "I just wanted to make sure we're okay," she said finally. "I know what I said yesterday was a lot." James turned from the window, running a hand through his hair. "We're okay," he said quietly, just trying to process. "Good," she murmured, "because the last thing I ever wanted was to lose you." The simplicity of that statement nearly broke him. "You won't lose me, Eve. Promise." He hesitated. Always. But even as he said it, the word always twisted in his chest. Because if he gave her what she'd asked for, always would never mean the same again. There was a long pause before she asked almost playfully, "So, what are you thinking?" James smiled despite himself. "Complicated thoughts. That sounds like you." She chuckled softly, but he could hear the tension underneath. "You've probably made a list of pros and cons already." "Maybe 2 lists," he said, leaning against the counter. "Tell me." He hesitated. "Pro, you trust me. You feel safe with me. I'd never hurt you. And the cons." He looked out at the skyline again. "Everything else." There was a quiet exhale on the other end, and when she spoke, her voice had softened. "You're scared." "I'm terrified," he said honestly. "You're my best friend, the one constant in my life. If this goes wrong, I lose the only person who's ever really known me." "I know," she whispered. "I'm scared too." "But you still want this?" he asked. "Yes." Her answer came without hesitation. "Because I trust you more than I trust myself sometimes. And because—" She trailed off, then said more softly, "I'm tired of waiting for the perfect person who never shows up. Maybe what I've been waiting for was you all along." The words sank deep into him, quiet and devastating. He wanted to tell her that she deserved more than a moment built on fear and longing, that she deserved a man who wasn't paralyzed by what he might lose. But his throat wouldn't form the words, because the truth, the one he'd buried for years, was that he'd already fallen long before this conversation. "Eve," he said finally, "if we do this, I can't treat it like a transaction. I can't promise I'll stop feeling things I shouldn't." "Then don't stop," she whispered. The line went silent. He could hear her breathing, steady, intimate, too close. "I'll come over," he said suddenly before he could change his mind. "No," she said quickly. "Not yet. Let's not make it impulsive. Let's think about what we're walking into." He almost laughed. "You're more rational than I am right now." "I've been thinking about this for months," she admitted. "You deserve time to catch up." He didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was already sprinting ahead of his mind. After the call ended, James spent the rest of the morning pacing his apartment. He thought about every time he'd told himself she was just a friend. The nights she'd fallen asleep on his couch after watching old movies. The way she looked at him when she was trying not to cry. The way his chest had always tightened whenever another man took her on a date. Maybe he'd been lying to himself all along. By late afternoon, he couldn't stand the silence. He grabbed his jacket and left the penthouse, needing airspace, anything that would drown out the sound of her voice in his head. The autumn wind whipped down Fifth Avenue as he walked, his thoughts tangled with memories. He stopped at a crosswalk, staring at the reflection of the city lights on a puddle. Somewhere between the ripples, he saw her face. When he finally returned home that evening, a message waited on his phone. "I've been thinking too. If you decide no, I'll understand. But if you decide yes, I'll be at the Central Park Hotel on Saturday at 7, room 412. He read it twice, 3 times. His chest tightened and his pulse quickened. He typed deleted, then typed again. "Evelyn, are you sure?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Completely." He stared at the screen until it dimmed, his own reflection staring back. This is insanity, he thought. And yet beneath the fear, something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to name. That night, James dreamed of her not in fragments, but in vivid detail. Her laughter echoing through the Stanford Quad. The soft glow of her apartment window when she stayed up late working. Her eyes steady and brave the moment she said, "I trust you." When he woke, his heart was racing, and he knew whatever logic told him, his choice had already been made. The next 2 days crawled by, each one heavier than the last. He threw himself into work, but every meeting blurred, every conversation faded. His business partner, Lucas, noticed. "You look like hell," Lucas said on Friday, sliding a folder across the table. "Trouble in paradise." James forced a smirk. "Didn't know I lived in paradise." "Then it's worse than I thought," Lucas said, eyeing him. "Who is she?" James opened his mouth to deflect, but the truth was too close to the surface. "No one. Someone." He sighed. "Someone I shouldn't want." Lucas chuckled. "Then she's probably exactly the one you do want." James didn't reply, but that night those words echoed in his head as he stood before his closet, staring at his reflection. Saturday came, dressed in rain. The city shimmered under it, lights blurring like watercolor on glass. James arrived at the Central Park Hotel 10 minutes early, heart thundering so loud it felt like it might shake loose the walls of his composure. He hesitated outside room 412, fingers brushing the keycard she'd texted him. For a moment, he thought about turning around, about going back to the safety of being her friend, her anchor, her constant. Then he heard her voice, through the door, soft and nervous, humming an old jazz tune they used to play during long work nights. Something inside him broke open. He knocked once. The door opened, and there she was, Evelyn Beaumont, in a navy dress that hugged her curves with quiet grace, her curls tumbling softly around her face. Her eyes met his, hope and fear warring in equal measure, and the air between them shifted heavy with the unspoken. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey," he replied. His voice came out lower than he expected, rougher. "You came." "Of course I did." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I realized something." "What?" "That walking away from you has never worked." Her breath hitched, and for a moment neither of them moved. The city lights filtered through the sheer curtains, painting gold on her skin. He stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint trace of her perfume, warm vanilla and something delicate, like the memory of summer. "Eve," he said, his voice soft, but certain, "if we do this, it's not casual. It never could be." "I don't want casual," she whispered. "I just want you." Her honesty hit him like a current. Without another word, he reached out his hand, brushing her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, as though she'd been waiting a lifetime for it. For a heartbeat, time paused. The rain outside the city, beyond the noise of the world, all falling away until there was only them. Then he kissed her. It was slow at first, hesitant, reverent, then deeper, fuller, like every moment they'd ever shared had been leading here. Her hands gripped his shirt, his arms wrapped around her, drawing her closer. The kiss wasn't about desire. It was about recognition, a coming home to something that had always existed, just hidden beneath the surface of their friendship. When they finally broke apart, she whispered against his lips, "James, yeah, I'm not afraid anymore." He smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "Neither am I." Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows, like applause from an unseen audience. Inside, two souls stood at the edge of something vast and unknown, ready to step forward together. And for the first time in 12 years, James Carter wasn't thinking about what he might lose. He was thinking about what he'd already found. The air in the hotel room felt alive, thick with the electricity of something they both understood could never be undone. Rain whispered against the windows of the Central Park Hotel, a soft percussion that matched the uneven rhythm of Evelyn's heartbeat as she stood at the foot of the bed, smoothing the hem of her navy dress for what felt like the 100th time. She'd arrived too early, an hour before 7 to be exact. She'd spent that hour pretending to read, then rearranging things that didn't need rearranging: the wine glasses, the bouquet of lilies on the table, the throw pillows that refused to sit straight. Nothing calmed the pulse hammering in her throat. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo louder. When the knock finally came, her breath caught. Eve James's voice carried through the door, gentle, hesitant. She hesitated for only a second before she opened it. He stood in the hallway, the muted light spilling over his white shirt and dark jeans. His hair was slightly damp from the rain, his usual composure frayed at the edges. When his gaze met hers, something in his expression shifted, tension and longing woven into one quiet exhale. "You look..." His voice trailed off. "You look beautiful. Thank you." She stepped aside, allowing him in. The scent of rain clung to him, clean and familiar. He looked around the room, a blend of soft gold light, muted blues, and a view of Central Park, blurred by fog. Everything about it felt deliberate, but unpretentious, like her. She closed the door behind him, suddenly aware of how small the room felt with him in it. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "And yet you did." He turned to face her, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "I couldn't not." They stood there for a moment, suspended in silence, until she gestured toward the table. "I ordered some dinner, in case we wanted to talk first." He smiled faintly. "Talking first sounds good." They sat on the small sofa near the window, the space between them charged, but fragile. Evelyn poured 2 glasses of wine, her hands steadier than she expected. "To what are we drinking?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. She lifted her glass. "To truth." His eyes met hers. "To courage." The glasses touched with a quiet chime. For a few minutes they talked about ordinary things: the rain, the view, an upcoming project at her firm. The conversation felt almost normal, as though pretending could hold back the inevitable. But it couldn't. At one point, James leaned back, watching her. "You always do that," he said. "Do what pretend you're fine when you're not." She gave a small smile. "Old habit. You don't have to do that with me." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm here." The words landed between them like a key turning in a lock. He set his glass down. Eve, before we go any further, I need to say something. She tensed, her fingers tightening around her glass. If you're going to tell me we shouldn't know, he interrupted gently. I'm not here to stop this. I'm here because I need you to understand that this isn't casual for me. It can't be. Her breath caught. I don't know what happens after tonight, he continued. Maybe everything changes, maybe nothing does, but I need you to know that you mean too much to me to treat this like some moment of weakness. She looked at him for a long time, her pulse steadying. James, you've never been a weakness in my life. You've always been the thing that makes me stronger. He exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half relief. God, you make it impossible not to love you. The words slipped out before he could catch them. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Say that again. He froze, realizing what he'd just confessed. Evelyn. Say it. She insisted, her voice trembling. He met her gaze, no longer hiding. You make it impossible not to love you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. A truth finally spoken after years of denial. She set her wine glass aside and reached out her hand, finding his. Then stop trying not to. Something in him broke open. When he leaned forward and kissed her, it wasn't hesitant this time. It was the collision of years of restraint, finally undone. Her lips were soft, trembling against his, tasting of wine, and something sweeter trust. His hand slid to her neck, thumb, brushing her skin as though memorizing it. She melted into him, her body recognizing something her mind had long tried to silence. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I, he admitted, his forehead resting against hers. But we'll figure it out. Her laugh was small, fragile. You make it sound simple. It isn't, he said softly, but nothing worth having ever is. He kissed her again, slower this time, tracing the edges of her uncertainty with care. Every movement was deliberate, a question asked and answered in the language of touch. As they moved together, the rain outside grew heavier, a soft roar against the glass. She felt the world narrow to the space of his arms, the warmth of his breath, the rhythm of his heartbeat against hers. He whispered her name like a prayer, and for the first time she didn't shy away from the depth of what it meant. It wasn't about perfection or fantasy. It was about being seen. Entirely. When morning came, pale light spilling through the curtains, Evelyn woke to the unfamiliar weight of someone beside her. The sheets were tangled, the air still carrying the scent of rain and skin. For a brief, blissful moment, she didn't move. She simply breathed. James's arm was draped across her waist, his palm warm against her stomach. His breathing was slow even, peaceful. She turned slightly, studying him in the soft light. The lines of his face relaxed, his hair falling across his forehead, the faint trace of stubble along his jaw. He looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Memories from the night before flickered through her mind, his hands trembling when he touched her, the way he'd stopped to ask if she was okay, the tenderness that had anchored every movement. It hadn't been awkward like she feared. It hadn't been rushed. It had been real, and that terrified her, because she had told herself this would be about trust, not love, about closure, not beginnings. But somewhere in the middle of his whispered, "You're safe with me," something inside her had shifted. He stirred beside her, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." She smiled faintly. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted. "But good." He smiled, that soft, quiet smile that had always undone her. "Good." For a moment, neither of them spoke. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You're thinking too much. I always do. Want to tell me what about?" She hesitated, then said, "About what happens now." He sighed, rolling onto his back. "I was afraid you'd ask that." "Why?" "Because I don't know the answer." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying him. "You're James Carter. You always have answers." "Not for this," he said quietly. "Not when it comes to you." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. "James." He turned to face her again. "Last night, Eve, it wasn't just physical for me. It never could be. You know that, right?" Her throat constricted. "I know." "Do you?" His voice was gentle, but the question lingered between them like smoke. She nodded slowly. "Because it wasn't for me either." He reached out his hand, finding hers under the sheets. "Then we'll figure it out." But even as he said it, she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the fear of what figuring it out might cost them. Hours later, as they dressed, the light outside shifted from gold to gray. Evelyn watched him button his shirt, each motion measured precise. He looked every bit the man the world saw, controlled, composed, untouchable. And yet, when he met her gaze, something tender flickered there. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "Whatever happens, you're not losing me." "I'm holding you to that," she whispered. He smiled, faintly kissed her one last time, and left with a promise hanging in the quiet air. When the door closed behind him, the room felt impossibly large. Evelyn stood there barefoot on the carpet, the sound of rain fading into silence. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed the weight of what they'd done, settling into her bones like something both sacred and irreversible. Outside, the city stirred to life again, horns, footsteps, the chaos of New York reclaiming the morning. But inside that quiet hotel room, Evelyn Beaumont's world had changed forever. She didn't know yet if she'd gained everything or lost it all, only that somewhere between fear and trust, she had crossed a line she could never return from. The week that followed blurred into a haze of meetings, unanswered texts, and long silences that stretched like invisible walls. The morning after their night at the Central Park Hotel, Evelyn had expected awkwardness, maybe a quiet breakfast, a soft goodbye, a promise that things would be okay. Instead, James had left before she woke, leaving only a note on the nightstand. "Didn't want to wake you. You looked peaceful. We'll talk soon, Jay. We'll talk soon." She'd repeated those words a dozen times, as if they could fill the emptiness that lingered after his departure. But soon came and went. 3 days later, she still hadn't heard from him. At first, she tried to be rational. James Carter wasn't just anyone. He was a billionaire CEO whose life ran on meetings, contracts, and investors. Silence in his world didn't mean absence. But this silence felt different. It wasn't distance for practicality. It was distance born of fear. By Friday, she couldn't take it anymore. Her best friend Monica leaned over the café table, stirring her latte with exaggerated patience. "You're overthinking," she said. "Maybe he's giving you space." "Space." Evelyn scoffed, tracing the rim of her cup. "Mon, he's a communicator. He texts when his plane lands, when his meeting ends, when he's running late." But after that night, nothing. Monica raised an eyebrow. "You did cross the line between best friends and complicated lovers, you know. Maybe he's figuring out how to process that." "I thought we were past the figuring out stage," Evelyn muttered. Monica leaned back, crossing her arms. "Eve, come on. You slept with your best friend." The man's probably terrified he just risked the one relationship he values most. Evelyn exhaled. So am I. She hadn't realized until now how much she'd been holding her breath, waiting for his call, his voice, his reassurance. But what if the night had changed only her? By the time she left the café, the early November wind had picked up, brushing through her hair and making her coat flap around her knees. She walked without destination, her phone in hand, thumb hovering over his name. Then, as if the universe couldn't resist irony, his name flashed on the screen. James Carter, calling. Her heart jumped. She pressed accept so quickly she almost dropped the phone. "James, hey," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Calm, too calm. I was starting to think you'd fallen off the planet," she said, forcing lightness into her tone. "I know. I'm sorry," he said. "Things got complicated." "Complicated," she repeated softly. That word again. He sighed. "Eve, I've had back-to-back meetings. The board's pushing the merger with Vivian Blake's company, and it's—" She froze. "Vivian Blake." "Yeah," he said. "She's been in town for negotiations all week." "Oh." The single syllable carried more weight than she intended. He caught it immediately. "It's business, Eve. Strictly business." "Of course," she said too quickly. "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were," he interrupted gently. "And I get it." She hated how easily he could read her, hated even more that he wasn't wrong. There was a pause long enough for her pulse to fill the silence. "Listen," he said finally. "There's a charity gala tomorrow night at the Ritz. It's part of the partnership announcement. I want you to come." "Come," she repeated, startled. "As my guest." Her heart stuttered. "You're sure that's a good idea? After everything?" He hesitated. "Maybe it's exactly what we need. To stop pretending something's wrong." She didn't answer right away, but something in his voice, soft, careful, a little desperate, made her say yes. The night of the gala. Manhattan glittered beneath the cold glow of November lights. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and champagne laughter, the kind of world where money and power moved like oxygen. Evelyn stood near the entrance, clutching her clutch purse like a lifeline. She wore a sleek black gown that hugged her curves without apology. Her curls swept back to reveal her shoulders. She looked composed, but her stomach twisted with nerves. When James entered the room, seemed to shift around him. His black tuxedo fit perfectly, his posture easy yet commanding. People turned as he passed, whispering the kind of attention that came naturally to him. He saw her immediately. A slow, unguarded smile spread across his face. "You're breathtaking," he said as he approached. She smiled back, though her pulse thudded in her ears. "You clean up well yourself, Carter." For the first hour, things felt almost normal. They moved through the crowd together, exchanging polite smiles, making conversation with investors and journalists. He never let go of her hand. When he introduced her, it was always with quiet pride. "This is Evelyn Beaumont, my guest." It should have been enough. But then she arrived. Vivian Blake. Tall, blonde, elegant, in an emerald gown that looked designed to command attention. The kind of woman who seemed carved out of the same world James belonged to. She greeted him with a confident smile, her hand lingering on his arm a little too long. "James," she purred, "you always manage to outshine the room." "Vivian," he said smoothly, "you know that's impossible when you're in it." Evelyn forced a polite smile, but her chest tightened. Vivian's gaze flicked toward her, sharp and assessing. "And this must be—" "Evelyn Beaumont." James said, his tone even. "A close friend. Friend." The word hit harder than she expected. Vivian extended a manicured hand. Lovely to meet you, Evelyn. I've heard your firm handled Carter Innovations' rebranding last year. Impressive work. Thank you, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Vivian's smile was all sugar and steel. James has excellent taste in collaborators. Evelyn's reply came with quiet grace. He does. But the conversation left her shaken. Every laugh, every shared glance between James and Vivian felt magnified. The distance between her world and his suddenly felt enormous, the gap between Brooklyn and billion-dollar ballrooms. Later, as the orchestra shifted into a waltz, James turned to her. Dance with me. She hesitated. I don't really. He smiled. You do. You just pretend not to. She let him lead her to the floor. His hand settled at her waist, firm but gentle, and for a few blissful moments, the rest of the room faded. The tension melted as they moved together, his breath warm against her temple. You're quiet, he murmured, just thinking about how easily you fit here. She lifted her gaze to meet his. How much I don't. His brows drew together. Don't say that. It's true, she said softly. Look around you. These people know your world. I'm the outsider who got in because she happened to be friends with the king, Evelyn. She stepped back slightly, the spell broken. It's fine. I just needed to see it for myself. Before he could answer, a photographer appeared asking for a picture. James smiled politely, his hand tightening on her waist as the flash went off. She smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. Minutes later, she excused herself. In the quiet of the ladies' room, she leaned against the marble counter staring at her reflection. Her lipstick was flawless, her dress perfect, but she'd never felt smaller. The door opened. Vivian's voice floated in, cool and amused. Beautiful dress. You wear it well. Evelyn turned. Thank you. Vivian studied her reflection in the mirror, reapplying her lipstick. You seem uncomfortable. I'm fine. Oh, I didn't mean it as criticism. Vivian smiled faintly. It's just this world has a way of swallowing people whole, especially those who weren't born into it. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Is that a warning? An observation? She capped her lipstick. James is a remarkable man, loyal, driven, but he lives under a microscope. Every choice he makes is analyzed, every person he's seen with questioned. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt. The implication hung in the air, like perfume, sweet but poisonous. Evelyn met her gaze in the mirror, her voice steady. If I get hurt, it'll be because I chose to take that risk. Vivian's smile didn't falter. Then I suppose you're braver than most. She turned and left, the click of her heels echoing down the hall. Evelyn stayed a moment longer, her pulse trembling beneath her calm exterior. Then she drew in a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back out into the noise and light. James found her near the exit. Hey, he said, worry flickering in his eyes. I was looking for you. I needed some air, she said simply. He studied her, sensing more beneath her calm tone, but knowing better than to push. Let me take you home. She nodded. The car ride was silent. Rain streaked down the windows again, a quiet repetition of the night that had changed everything. When they stopped outside her apartment in Brooklyn, he turned to her. Eve, he said softly, don't let tonight make you question who you are. She smiled faintly. That's the thing, James. I'm not questioning who I am. I'm questioning where I fit. Before he could respond, she opened the door and stepped out. The rain caught her hair, the city lights blurring around her like a watercolor painting. James watched her go, his chest tightening, with something he didn't have a name for. Inside her apartment, Evelyn closed the door, leaned against it, and let the silence settle. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a train rumbled, life went on. But for her, something had shifted again, subtle but irreversible. She'd given him trust. She'd given him herself. But tonight, watching him move so effortlessly through his world, she'd realized something painful. Maybe love wasn't always enough to bridge the distance between two worlds. The next morning came, with a stillness that felt cruel. The rain from the night before had washed the city clean, but for Evelyn, everything still carried the haze of confusion. The memory of the gala replayed in fragments, the glimmering chandeliers, Vivian's deliberate smile, James's hand at her waist, the quiet ache beneath every glance. She told herself she wouldn't let it ruin her, that she wouldn't be that woman, the one who let a man's silence define her. But as the hours passed and James didn't call, her heart whispered what her pride refused to admit. Something had cracked, and it wasn't just her confidence. At her office in Midtown, she tried to lose herself in work. The team's chatter, the steady rhythm of keyboards, the scent of coffee, familiar distractions. Yet even her own voice sounded foreign when she spoke in meetings. Her creative director, Dana, noticed. "You okay, Evie?" she asked gently after a pitch session. Evelyn forced a smile. "Just tired." Dana leaned on the desk, studying her. "You've been tired all week. You want to talk about it, or should I start guessing?" Evelyn chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You'd guess wrong." "Would I?" Dana raised a brow. "Because I saw the photos from the gala last night. The entire city did. You and the James Carter walking in together. You were trending for a few hours." Evelyn froze. Trending page 6. Instagram. Some gossip accounts. The caption said, "Brooklyn beauty at billionaire's side." Her heart sank. Oh God. Dana's tone softened. "Look, you don't owe anyone an explanation. But just be careful, okay? The higher up a man stands, the harder the fall for the woman beside him." Evelyn nodded silently. The words stayed with her long after Dana walked away. By late afternoon, her phone buzzed finally. "James. James. Can we talk tonight?" Evelyn. "Sure. My place. James. Yes. 8." She stared at the message, her pulse uneven. He wanted to talk. That should have been a good sign. But the distance she'd felt at the gala still clung to her like perfume she couldn't wash off. When he arrived that night, he looked exhausted. His tie hung loose, the first 2 buttons of his shirt undone. She opened the door before he could knock twice. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." He hesitated before stepping inside. The moment he entered, she could feel it, the shift. The ease that once lived between them was gone, replaced by something careful, weighted. "Do you want coffee?" "Wine?" she asked, searching for normalcy. He shook his head. "No thanks." They stood in her small living room, the city lights filtering through the blinds. Finally, she crossed her arms. "So, you wanted to talk?" He nodded, pacing once before stopping. "Eve, about last night." She swallowed hard. "What about it?" "I could see it in your eyes," he said quietly. "You weren't comfortable." "You're right," she admitted. "I wasn't." He nodded slowly. "I should have protected you better." "That's not what I needed," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I didn't need protection. I needed you to see me." He looked at her sharply. "I did see you. Not like her," she said. "Not like Vivian. The moment she showed up, I disappeared. You smiled, you laughed, you made it look effortless. And I was just the woman standing beside you, pretending to belong." "That's not fair," he said. "You know that world. You've been to events before." Not like that, she whispered. Not when every person there looked at me like I was a headline waiting to happen. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't see how they looked at you? That's exactly why I asked you to come. I wanted them to see you, to know you're part of my life. But you didn't say that, she said. You didn't call me your girlfriend. You called me your friend. His silence was deafening. I had to, he said finally. It's complicated. The merger. Vivian's board. The press. She laughed softly, bitterly. There it is. The merger, the investors, the image, everything but us. Evelyn. He began stepping closer. You have no idea how much I'm trying to protect what we have. What we have, she repeated. James, you left before sunrise the morning after everything. You didn't call for days. And when you finally did, it was to invite me to stand beside you at a gala, where I was invisible. He flinched, the truth hitting harder than any accusation could. I thought, she continued, her voice breaking, that night meant something to you. But maybe I was wrong. He closed the distance between them, his voice low and raw. You weren't wrong. Her eyes filled, but she didn't move away. Then why does it feel like I lost you, the moment I had you? Reached out, cupping her face. Because I don't know how to love you, and still keep the world from tearing us apart. Her breath hitched. Then maybe you shouldn't try to protect me from the world. Maybe you should stand beside me in it. He looked at her, then really looked, and she saw it. The war inside him. The fear, the longing, the pride. I don't know how, he said finally. Then learn, she whispered. Because I'm not going to beg to be seen in your world, when I already know my worth in mine. He dropped his hand, pain flickering in his eyes. You think I don't see your worth, Evelyn? You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Then stop making me feel like a secret. The words hung between them, sharp and trembling. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, I need time. She nodded slowly, though every part of her screamed, no. Take all the time you need. Just don't expect me to wait in the dark for you to decide if I fit into your light. His jaw clenched. That's not fair. No, she said, her voice soft but unyielding. What's not fair is asking me to love you quietly. Silence. Then he whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. And yet you did, she said. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. I should go. She didn't stop him. At the door, he turned back once. For what it's worth. I meant every word I said that night. Every touch, every breath. That was real. She blinked away the tears that blurred her vision. I know. That's what makes this so hard. When the door closed, the sound was final, a soft click that echoed louder than any shout. Evelyn stood in the middle of her apartment, her hands trembling. Outside, the city carried on, as if nothing had changed. But she knew better. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass. Below, New York pulsed with life. Cars, lights, strangers, all moving forward. For the first time, she realized she might have to do the same. She loved James Carter. That truth burned as fiercely as the city skyline. But love, she was beginning to learn, wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about knowing when to let go, even if your heart refused to follow. And as she watched the rain begin to fall again, Evelyn whispered to the night, not as a plea, but as a promise to herself. If he ever comes back, I hope he comes back ready. The days that followed were quiet in the cruelest way. Not the kind of quiet that soothed, but the kind that echoed, the kind that made every sound sharper, every silence heavier. Evelyn moved through her apartment like a shadow of herself. She worked, she smiled when she had to, but everything she did felt mechanical. There was no rhythm left to her life, no pulse that wasn't tied to the memory of him. James hadn't called, not once. The first night she'd stared at her phone until sleep claimed her. The second she tried to convince herself that maybe he was giving her space. By the fifth, she stopped making excuses. He was gone, not physically, but in that deliberate, self-protective way people leave when they're afraid of what they feel. On the seventh night, she deleted his messages, not because she wanted to forget, but because she couldn't keep rereading words that had once meant everything. At the office, Monica noticed. "You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes, she said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Is it work or heartbreak?" Evelyn forced a half smile. "Work. Heartbreak is less predictable." "Then let me make it predictable," Monica said gently. "He's going to realize he screwed up." "They always do." Evelyn shook her head. "He's not like that, Mon. James doesn't make emotional decisions. He calculates everything, even his silences. And what does that mean for you?" "It means I became a variable he didn't know how to solve." Monica sighed, reaching across the desk to squeeze her hand. "You're not a variable, Eve. You're the constant he'll regret losing." The kindness in her words almost broke her. Evelyn smiled weakly and went back to work, pretending the tears blurring her vision were from the light on her screen. That weekend she visited her mother's grave in Queens. It had been years since her passing, but the cemetery had always been Evelyn's place of reckoning, where she spoke truths she couldn't say aloud anywhere else. She brought lilies, her mother's favorite, and knelt beside the headstone. "Hey, Mom," she murmured, brushing a leaf away from the engraved name. "You'd probably say I should have known better. That loving a man like him was a risk. But I didn't fall for his money or his world. I fell for the way he looked at me when no one else did." The wind whispered through the trees, soft and cold. "I thought love could make us equals," she said quietly. "But maybe it's not about equality. Maybe it's about timing, and his world doesn't have room for my kind of timing." She stayed there until the sun dipped low, the sky turning the same muted gold as the day she'd first met James. She remembered his laugh, his stubbornness, the way he'd once said, "You make it impossible not to love you." Now he made it impossible to forget him. Across the city, in the glass tower of Carter Innovations, James sat alone in his office long after his staff had gone home. The city glittered below, cold and brilliant. His phone lay face down on the desk, Evelyn's name buried somewhere in his contacts like a wound he refused to touch. He'd tried to focus on work, the merger, the numbers, the future, but none of it felt right. Every achievement rang hollow, every success tainted by the memory of her standing in that black gown, her eyes filled with pain he'd caused. Lucas, his business partner, had noticed. "You look like hell," Lucas said, stepping into the office uninvited. "Good evening to you too," James muttered. "Cut the sarcasm," Lucas said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're distracted, short-tempered, and you just turned down a deal that could have doubled your net worth. What's going on?" James didn't answer. Lucas studied him for a moment. "It's her, isn't it?" James looked up sharply. "Don't start. I'm not judging, man. I'm just saying, if she's the reason you're sitting in an empty office at 10 p.m., staring at a skyline instead of sleeping, maybe you should do something about it." James's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Lucas said, crossing his arms. "But you're the one who always said, fear ruins more lives than failure ever could. So tell me, which one are you doing right now?" The question lingered long after Lucas left. James sat there, the city reflecting in the glass behind him. He thought about the way Evelyn had looked at him that last night. Not angry, not desperate, just tired. Tired of waiting for a man who didn't know how to stand beside her. He'd told himself he'd hurt her, to protect her, to shield her from the scrutiny that came with his life. But the truth, the one he couldn't face, was simpler. He'd been protecting himself. Because loving her meant vulnerability, and vulnerability in his world was weakness. But now, with her gone, all his strength felt meaningless. A week later, Evelyn was leaving the office late when the sky opened up again, drenching the city in sheets of rain. She pulled her coat tight and hurried toward the subway, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. She was halfway down the steps when a voice called her name. Eve. She froze. James stood at the edge of the sidewalk, rain pouring down his shoulders, his shirt plastered to his chest, his hair dripping into his eyes. For a moment she thought she'd imagined him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, uncertain. He took a step toward her, breathless. "I needed to see you." "In the rain," she said, forcing a hollow laugh. "That's dramatic even for you." "I deserve that," he said, "but please just give me a minute." She hesitated, then nodded toward the awning of a closed bookstore. They stepped under it, water cascading off the edge just inches away. James took a shaky breath. "I've spent 2 weeks convincing myself that letting you go was the right thing, that it was noble or necessary or logical. But every day since then has been wrong." She looked away. "You don't get to say that now." "I know," he said quickly, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to understand why I left that night, why I've been silent." "Then say it," she whispered. He met her eyes. "Because I was afraid. Not of you, of what you made me feel. I've spent my life controlling everything, my company, my reputation, my future. And then you came along and suddenly control didn't matter. You did." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. "I kept thinking," he continued, "if I let you into my world completely, you'd drown in it. The scrutiny, the headlines, the people like Vivian who smile while they're tearing you apart. I wanted to protect you from all that." Evelyn's voice was soft, trembling. "You weren't protecting me, James. You were protecting your comfort. You wanted me close enough to love, but far enough not to risk anything." He flinched. "You're right." The rain pounded harder. Somewhere down the street, a car horn blared, distant and fleeting. "I don't want comfort anymore," he said finally. "I want you, all of you. The woman who calls me out, who laughs at me, who terrifies me, because she makes me feel alive." Evelyn looked at him for a long time, her heart warring with itself. "You say that now," she said softly. "But what happens the next time your world and mine collide? When it's inconvenient, or when someone whispers that I don't belong?" He stepped closer, his eyes steady. "Then I'll hold your hand tighter." She blinked back tears. "You can't fix this with words." "I know," he said. "Then tell me what I can do." "Learn to fight for something other than yourself," she said. He nodded slowly, the rain still falling between them. "Then I'll start tonight." Before she could respond, he took her face in his hands and kissed her, not with desperation, but with clarity. The kind of kiss that wasn't an apology or a promise, but a truth. For a moment the world disappeared, the rain, the noise, the ache. There was only them. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "This doesn't erase what happened. It's not supposed to." He said, "It's supposed to remind us what's still here." She looked at him, really looked, and saw it the same man she'd fallen for, but different now. softer, unmasked, human. She touched his cheek lightly. Then prove it, James. Not with a kiss, not with words, with time. He nodded once, a flicker of hope breaking through the storm. As she turned and walked toward the subway, James stood under the rain, watching her go. For the first time in his life, he wasn't planning, calculating, or controlling. He was waiting not for the world to bend his way, but for love to teach him how to stay. And Evelyn, stepping into the subway's dim light, realized something too. Sometimes love doesn't end where hearts break. Sometimes it begins there, quietly, painfully, and against all reason, refusing to die. Winter descended on New York in slow, quiet layers, the kind of chill that crept into your bones before you realized you'd been cold for days. For Evelyn, it had been 3 weeks since that night in the rain. 3 weeks since James had shown up at her doorstep drenched and shaking with words that cracked open every defense she'd built. Since then, he had kept his word, or at least he was trying to. He called. Not constantly, not to fill the silence, but to ask how her day was, to share small things. An article he thought she'd like, a photo of his coffee in the middle of another meeting, a voice note that said simply, "Thinking of you." He didn't push. He didn't demand. He was just there, steady, patient, quieter than before. And yet Evelyn's heart still hesitated. One Sunday morning, she sat by her apartment window with a cup of tea, watching snowflakes drift over the Brooklyn rooftops. She was lost in thought when her phone buzzed. "James, there's something I want you to see today." "Evelyn, that's vague." "James, trust me." An hour later, a car waited for her outside her building. She almost didn't get in, almost texted him to cancel, but something in her chest pushed her forward. When she arrived, she realized the driver had brought her to Carter Innovations on a Sunday. The lobby was empty, its marble floors gleaming under soft light. She frowned, glancing at the receptionist's desk, but before she could ask, the elevator doors slid open. James stood inside, hands in his pockets, wearing a navy coat and that familiar half-smile that made her chest ache. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't. I would have come for you if you hadn't." She hesitated, studying him. "What is this just?" "Come with me." He led her up, not to his office, but to the top floor, the one still under renovation. When the elevator opened, she gasped. The space was raw, no furniture, no polished floors, but the view stretched endlessly across Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, the snow drifting against the glass, like soft confetti. James turned to her, his voice low. "I bought this floor for a project, but I couldn't decide what to do with it. A boardroom, a private suite, maybe an innovation hub. None of it felt right. Until now." She frowned slightly. "Why are you showing me this?" He took a step closer. "Because I've spent months making decisions based on what other people expect from me. This time, I want to build something that actually means something, something that reminds me what matters." "James." He smiled faintly. "You once said love isn't about protection. It's about standing beside someone even when it's inconvenient." "So that's what I'm doing." She blinked, confused. "You're going to build something about love?" He laughed softly. "Not exactly. I'm starting a foundation. Scholarships for young women in business and design, people like you, who fight their way into rooms that weren't built for them. I wanted you to be the first to know." Evelyn's breath caught. "You're serious?" "Completely." She looked at him, really looked, and saw something new. Not the guarded man who'd once feared his feelings, but someone stripped of pretense. Someone who'd finally understood what it meant to love without control. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. He shook his head. "It's because of you." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to do grand gestures to prove I'm not proving anything." He interrupted gently. "I'm changing, and I needed you to see that I can." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of air of understanding of everything they hadn't said yet. She turned toward the window arms, crossed loosely, watching the snow swirl beyond the glass. "You know," she murmured, "you're still infuriatingly dramatic." He chuckled. "I know, but it's working, isn't it?" Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't turn around. "A little." He took a slow breath. "I don't expect forgiveness, Eve, but I do want another chance to earn your trust. No promises, no pressure, just a chance." She stayed quiet for a long time. Then, without turning, she said softly, "You don't need to earn my trust, James. You already had it. You just forgot how to hold it." He nodded, accepting the truth in her words. "Then maybe now I'll learn how." She finally faced him, her eyes warm but cautious. "One day at a time." "One day at a time," he echoed. They stood there, the city stretching beneath them, and for the first time in months, Evelyn felt something close to peace. Over the next few weeks, their rhythm changed again, but this time it was balanced. He didn't hover, and she didn't run. They saw each other on weekends, sometimes over dinner, sometimes in quiet spaces where they didn't have to talk at all. James stopped bringing his world into every moment. He started asking about hers, her projects, her ideas, her dreams. He showed up at her firm's winter showcase, standing quietly in the back as she presented a campaign she'd led. When the applause came, she caught his gaze across the room and he mouthed, "Proud of you." After the event, he waited for her outside. "You didn't have to come," she said, smiling despite herself. "I wanted to," he said simply. The snow fell gently around them, dusting her coat, clinging to his hair. "You know," she teased, "people might start talking if you keep showing up at my events." "Let them," he said. "Maybe it's time they know." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly subtle, Mr. Carter." "I'm done hiding," he said softly. "Not you, not us." Her breath caught at the way he said it, not grandly, but with conviction. She studied him, then asked, "So what happens now?" He smiled. "We live, and we keep showing up for each other, for ourselves. That's all I know how to promise." She nodded slowly. "That's enough, but peace like snow never stays untouched for long." One morning, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. A link. No words. When she clicked it, her stomach dropped. Headline: Billionaire James Carter's secret relationship with Brooklyn designer sparks scandal amid merger negotiations. Below the headline were photos, grainy, invasive, of her and James at the showcase, of him watching her speak, of him brushing snow from her hair afterward. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from coworkers, acquaintances, even strangers. Comments flooded social media, some curious, some cruel. She's using him. Another Cinderella story. He'll drop her when the press gets bored. By noon, reporters were calling her office. Her boss had to intervene, saying firmly, "Take the rest of the week off." That night, James showed up at her apartment. He didn't knock twice. She opened the door before he could speak. "I saw it." "I know," he said, his voice heavy. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize for existing," she said bitterly. "Apologize for the world you live in." He closed his eyes briefly. "I can handle the headlines. I've been through worse. But you don't," she said, shaking her head. "Don't make this about protecting me again." "I'm not," he said quietly. "I'm angry. Angry that they get to drag you into something you never asked for." She folded her arms. "This is the world you wanted to share with me, James. This is the part you never warned me about. I didn't think it would come this soon. It always comes sooner than you think, she said softly. He stepped closer. Tell me what to do. Nothing, she whispered. There's nothing to fix. He stared at her helpless for the first time in his life. Then she added, quieter still. Just don't let this make you retreat again. Don't disappear. His eyes searched hers. I won't. They stood in silence for a long moment, two people caught between love and survival, between the promise of what they could be and the cost of what they already were. Finally, Evelyn reached for his hand. If we're really doing this, we do it together. Not as a story, not as a secret, and not as something we have to explain. He nodded, his fingers tightening around hers. Together. Outside, the snow kept falling soft, relentless, pure. Inside, for the first time in a long time, they stood side by side, unhidden. And somewhere between fear and faith, between the noise of the world and the quiet of their hearts, love finally began to take root, fragile but unshakable, real, but still becoming. The snow melted slowly that year, as if even winter didn't want to let go. But by March, New York began to thaw, and so did the distance that had been living quietly between Evelyn and James. The world had already learned about them. The headlines had burned, the whispers had spread, and the judgment had run its course. What remained, what endured, was what neither of them could control. Love. Evelyn had gone back to work after the scandal, head high, heart steady. Her boss had been understanding, her team protective. But the stares, those quiet assessing looks, lingered. She learned to ignore them, to meet every question with grace, and every doubt with silence. It wasn't her job to explain who she loved. James, meanwhile, fought his own war in boardrooms lined with polished smiles. Some partners had pulled back, others whispered warnings. Optics, they said. Perception matters. But he didn't flinch. He attended every meeting with quiet resolve, his eyes sharper, his patience thinner, his conviction unshakable. The night he made it official, the world held its breath. At a press conference meant to address his company's merger, he went off script. Cameras flashed. His voice, calm but firm, filled the room. Yes, the rumors are true, he said. I'm in a relationship with Evelyn Beaumont. She's brilliant, she's independent, and she didn't need me to build her success. If my personal life affects your confidence in my leadership, then perhaps you've misunderstood what leadership means. The headlines the next morning were divided, half scandal, half admiration. But none of it mattered anymore. Because that evening, as Evelyn sat in her apartment, watching the replay of his words, she realized something she'd spent her whole life running from. She was loved out loud. Not quietly, not in secret, out loud. When he knocked on her door later that night, she didn't even let him speak. She just threw her arms around him. I saw what you did, she whispered against his chest. You didn't have to. I did. He murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Because you deserved to be chosen in the light, not the shadows. Evelyn pulled back, eyes glistening. And what happens now? You know the press won't stop. I don't care, he said simply. Let them talk. I'll keep building. We'll keep living. Eventually, they'll find another story to chase. She smiled softly. You sound like you actually believe that. I have to, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because if I don't believe in us, who will? Months passed. Seasons shifted again. By summer, their worlds had begun to intertwine in small, unforced ways. Evelyn's firm took on Carter Innovations as a creative client, under a new initiative James launched to highlight women-led businesses. It wasn't charity, it was strategy, but with purpose. One afternoon, they stood side by side in a crowded room filled with young designers and entrepreneurs. James was speaking about innovation and risk. His sleeves rolled up, his voice steady. Evelyn stood near the back, watching him with quiet pride. When he caught her gaze mid-sentence, his lips curved into that familiar, unguarded smile. She blushed looking down, but she didn't move away. She stayed, and that she realized was everything. Later, after the event, they walked through Central Park hand in hand. The city shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Street musicians played softly in the distance, children ran across the grass, and for once everything felt easy. "I was terrified that night," Evelyn said quietly. He glanced over. "Which one?" "The night you stood in the rain outside the subway," she said, smiling faintly. "I thought letting you in again would break me." He squeezed her hand. "Did it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said honestly, "but not in the way I feared. You broke me open, James. You made room for something better." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "That's all I ever wanted to do." Her eyes softened. "And all I ever wanted was to stop being afraid of being seen." He cupped her face gently. "Then stop hiding. Let them see you. Let them see us." "I already am," she whispered. He kissed her, then slowly, tenderly, the kind of kiss that didn't burn, but healed. Around them, the world continued. Car horns, laughter, footsteps. But in that moment, none of it mattered. When they finally pulled apart, she laughed quietly. "You know, we've been through enough drama to fill 10 romance novels." He smirked. "Let's aim for just one happy ending." It came on an autumn morning, almost 2 years after that first conversation in the café. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in a pale ivory dress. Not a gown, not something extravagant. Simple, elegant, hers. Outside, the garden behind her father's brownstone was alive with color, burnt orange leaves, golden sunlight, the hum of quiet joy. Monica fussed over the flowers in her hair. "You nervous?" Terrified, Evelyn admitted, smiling. "Good. Means it's real." Her father knocked softly before stepping in. He was wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to her college graduation. "You ready, sweetheart?" Evelyn took a shaky breath. "I think so." As he led her outside, she caught sight of James, waiting at the end of the aisle. He wasn't surrounded by luxury or guests of status, just people who mattered. Monica, Lucas, a handful of family and friends. And when he saw her, his expression shifted from awe to something almost reverent. "You look—" he began when she reached him, but his voice faltered. "Like myself," she teased softly. "Like everything I never thought I'd deserve." She smiled, her hand trembling slightly in his. "You always did. You just had to believe it." The ceremony was small, intimate, and perfectly imperfect. When it was time for vows, Evelyn spoke first. "I used to think love was supposed to be easy," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "That if it was right, it would never hurt, never test me, never ask me to grow. But then I met you, James Carter, the man who taught me that love isn't about ease, it's about courage. It's about standing still when every fear tells you to run. It's about staying when it's hard, believing when it's scary, and choosing again and again to show up. So today I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you even when the world makes it hard." James swallowed hard before speaking. "I've built empires, closed deals, led thousands, but nothing has challenged me, humbled me, or changed me like loving you. You made me human, Evelyn Beaumont. You taught me that strength isn't control, it's vulnerability. It's letting someone see your flaws and still believing you're worthy of love. So I promise for as long as I'm breathing to never stop learning how to love you better. When they exchanged rings, the world seemed to hold its breath. And when he kissed her, the applause around them blurred into a soft, endless hum of joy. Later that evening, under string lights and soft jazz, they danced barefoot in the garden. She leaned against his chest, her heart steady for the first time in years. He whispered, "So, did we make it?" She smiled against his shoulder. "We're still making it. That's the point." He chuckled softly. "God, I love you." "I know," she said. "And that's the miracle." As the night deepened and laughter filled the air, Evelyn looked up at the stars scattered above the New York skyline. For a long time, she'd believed love was something that happened to other people. People braver, simpler, less complicated. But now she knew the truth. Love wasn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It was about imperfect hearts that refused to give up. About forgiveness that came after fear, and about the quiet decision every single day to stay. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories aren't the ones that begin with fireworks. They're the ones that survive the rain. So if you've ever loved someone and lost them, if you've ever doubted your worth or feared you didn't belong in someone's world, remember this. The right love won't make you shrink. It will make you rise. And when it finds you like James found Evelyn, it won't demand that you change. It will ask only that you stay.